Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my continuation of Stephen King's Later. Here we go. He came walking towards us, which didn't surprise me. Most of them, not all, but most, are attracted to living people for a while, like bugs to a bug light. That's kind of a horrible way to put it, but it's all I can think of. I would have known he was dead even if I didn't know he was dead, because of what he was wearing. It was a chilly day, but he was dressed in a plain white tee, baggy shorts, and those strappy sandals Mom calls Jesus shoes. Plus there was something else, something weird. A yellow sash with a blue ribbon pinned to it. Sash or sass, I don't really know what the word is. Maybe like some kind of bag, I assume. Liz was saying something to my mother about how there was no one there and I was just pretending. But I paid no attention. I pulled free of Mom's hand and walked towards Mr. Thomas. He stopped. "Hello, Mr. Thomas," I said. "I'm Jamie Conklin, Tia's son. I've never met you." "Oh, come on," Liz said from behind me. "Be quiet," Mom said. But some of Liz's skepticism must have gotten through because she asked me if I was sure Mr. Thomas was really there. I ignored this too. I was curious about the sash he was wearing. Oh, like a sash, like a satchel sash, something like that. Had been wearing when he died. "I was at my desk," he said. "I always wear my sash when I'm writing. It's my good luck charm." "Oh, it's okay, it's something else maybe. Okay. What's the blue ribbon for?" "The regional spelling bee I won when I was in 6th grade. Spelled down kids from 20 other schools. I lost in the state competition, but I got my blue ribbon for the regional." Regional? Regional, probably, yeah. My mother made the sash and pinned the ribbon on it. In my opinion, I thought it was some sort of weird thing to still be wearing, since 6th grade must have been a zillion years ago for Mr. Thomas, but he said it without any embarrassment or self-consciousness. Something people can feel love. Remember me telling you about Mrs. Burkett kissing Mr. Burkett's cheek. And they can feel hate, something I found out in due time, but most of the other emotions seem to leave when they die. Even the love never seemed all that strong to me. I don't like to tell you this, but hate stays stronger and lasts longer. I think when people see ghosts, as opposed to dead people, it's because they are hateful. People think ghosts are scary because they are. I turned back to Mom and Liz and, "Mom, did you know Mr. Thomas wears a sash when he writes?" Her eyes widened. "That was in the saloon interview he did 5 or 6 years ago." "He's wearing it now?" "Yeah, it got a blue ribbon on it from the spelling bee he won in the interview." He laughed and called it my silly affectation. "Maybe so," Mr. Thomas said. "But most writers have silly affectations and superstitions. We're like baseball players that way, Jimmy. And who can argue with 9 straight New York Times bestsellers?" "I'm Jamie," I said. Liz said, "You told Champ there about the interview? See?" "Must have, or he read it himself. He's a hell of a good reader. He knew, that's all, and he..." "Be quiet," my mother said fiercely. Liz raised her hands like surrendering. Mom stepped up beside me, looking at what to her was just a gravel path with nobody on it. Mr. Thomas was standing right in front of her with his hands in the pockets of his shorts. They were loose, and I hoped he wouldn't push down on his pockets too hard, because it looked like to me like he wasn't wearing any undies. Tell him what I told you to tell him. Mom wanted me to tell him that he had to help us order thin financial ice we've been walking on for a year, or more was going to break, and we drowned in a sea of debt. Also that the agency had begun to bleed clients because of her riders knew we were in trouble and might be forced to close. Rats deserting and the sinking ship was what she called them one day when Liz wasn't there and Mom was into her fourth glass of wine. I didn't bother with all that blah 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 thought. Dead people have to answer your questions, at least until they disappear. And they have to tell the truth. So I just cut to the chase. Mom wants to know the secret of Ragnarok is about. She wants to know the whole story. Do you know the whole story, Mr. Thomas? Of course. He shoved his hands deeper into his pockets, and now I could see a little line of hair running down the middle of his stomach from below his navel. I didn't want to see that, but I did. I always have everything before I write anything. I keep it all in my head. I have to, otherwise someone might steal it. Put it on the internet, spoil the surprises. If he'd been alive, that might have come out sounding paranoid. Dead? He was just stating a fact, or what he believed was a fact. And, hey, I thought he had a point. Computer trolls were always spilling stuff on the net. Everything was boring shit, like political secrets to the really important things. Like what was going to happen in the season final of Fringe. Liz walked away from me and Mom, sat on one of the benches beside the pool, crossed her legs, and lit a cigarette. She had apparently decided to let the lunatics run the asylum. That was okay with me. Liz had her good points, but that morning she was basically in the way. Mom wants you to tell me everything, I said to Mr. Thomas. I'll tell her. And she'll write the last Ragnarok book. So say you sent her almost all of it before you died, along with notes about how to finish the last couple of chapters. Alive, he would have howled at the idea of someone else finishing his book. His work was the most important thing in his life, and he was very passionate and possessive of it. But now the rest of him was lying in a mortician stable somewhere, dressed in the khaki shorts and the yellow sash he'd been wearing as he wrote his last few sentences. The version of him talking to me was no longer jealous or possessive of his secrets. Can she do that? Was all he asked. Mom had assured me and Liz on the way out to Cobblestone Cottage that she really could do that. Regis Thomas insisted that no copy editor should sully a single one of his precious words, but in fact Mom had been copy editing his books for years without telling him, even back when Uncle Harry was still in his right mind and running the business. Some of the changes were pretty big, but he never knew, or at least never said anything. If anyone in the world could copy Mr. Thomas' style, it was my mother. But style wasn't the problem was story. She can, I said, because it was simpler than telling him all of that. Who is that other woman? Mr. Thomas asked, pointing at Liz. That's my mother's friend. Her name is Liz Dutton. Liz looked up briefly, then lit another cigarette. Are she and your mother? Mr. Thomas asked. Pretty sure, yeah. I thought so. It's how they look at each other. How did he say? Mom asked anxiously. He asked if you and Liz were close friends. I said, kinda lame, but all I could think of on the spur of the moment. So you will tell us the secrets of Ragnarok? I asked Mr. Thomas. I mean the whole book, not just the secret part. Yes, he said yes, I told Mom. and she took both her phone and a little tape recorder out of her bag. She didn't want to miss a single word. Tell him to be as detailed as he can. Mom says to be. I heard her, Mr. Thomas said. I'm dead. I'm not deaf. His shirts were lower than ever. Cool, I said. Listen, maybe you better pull up your shorts, Mr. Thomas, or your willy's gonna get chilly. He pulled up his shorts so they hung off his bony hips. Is it chilly? It doesn't feel that way to me. Then, window change in tone. Tia is starting to look old, Jimmy. I didn't bother to tell him again that my name was Jamie. Instead, I looked at my mother and holy God, she did look old. Was starting to, anyway. When had that happened? Tell us the story, I said. Begin at the beginning. Where else? Mr. Thomas said. It took an hour and a half, and by the time we were done, I was exhausted, and I think Mom was too. Mr. Thomas looked just the same at the end as when we started, standing there with that somehow sorry yellow sash falling down over his poochy belly and low-slung shorts. Liz parked her car between the gate spots with the dashboard light blimping, which was probably a good idea because the news of Mr. Thomas' death had begun to spread and people were showing up out front to snap pictures of Cobblestone Cottage. Once she came back to ask how much longer it'd be, and Mom just waved her off, told her to inspect the grounds or something, but mostly Liz hung in. It was stressful as well as exhausting, because our future depended on Mr. Thomas' book. It wasn't fair to me to have to bear the weight of that responsibility, not at 9, but there was no choice. I had to repeat everything Mr. Thomas said to Mom, or rather to Mom's recording devices, and Mr. Thomas had plenty to say. When he told me that he was able to keep everything in his head, he wasn't just blowing smoke, and Mom kept asking questions, mostly for clarification. Mr. Thomas didn't seem to mind, didn't seem to care one way or the other actually, but the way Mom was dragging things out started bugging the shit out of me. Also, my mouth was wickedly dry. When Liz brought me her leftover Coke from Burger King, I gulped down the few swallows that were left and gave her a hug. Thank you, I said, handing back the paper cup. I needed that. Very welcome. Liz had stopped looking boring. Now she looked thoughtful. She couldn't see Mr. Thomas, and I don't think she still totally believed he was there, but she knew something was going on, because she'd heard a 9-year-old boy spieling out a complicated plot featuring half a dozen major characters, and at least 24 minor ones. Oh, and the threesome. Under the influence of bulbous cannery grass supplied by the helpful Native Americans of Nottoway people, consisting of George Treadgill, Purely Beatoncourt, and Laura Goodhung, who ended up getting pregnant. Poor Laura always got the shitty end of the stick. At the end of Mr. Thomas' summary, the big secret came out, and it was a dilly. I'm not going to tell you what it was. Read the book, and find out yourself. If you haven't read it already, that is. Now I'll tell you the last sentence, Mr. Thomas said. He seemed as fresh as ever, although fresh is probably the wrong word to use with a dead person. His voice had started to fade though, just a little, because I always write that first. It's the beacon I wrote to. Last sentence coming up, I told Mom. Thank God, she said. Mr. Thomas raised one finger like an old-timer actor getting ready to give his big speech. On that day, a red sun went down over a deserted settlement, and the carved word that would puzzle generations glowed as if limned in blood. Creatone. Tell her, Creatone in capital letters, Jimmy. I told her, although I didn't know exactly what limbed in blood meant. then asked Mr. Thomas if we were done. Just as he said we were, I heard a brief siren from our front. 2 whoops and a blat. Oh God, Liz said. But not in a panically way, more like she had been expecting it. Here we go. She had her badge clipped to her belt and unzipped her parka so it would show. Then she went out front and came back with 2 cops. They were also wearing parkas, with Westchester County Police patches on them. "Cheese it, the cops," Mr. Thomas said, which I didn't understand at all. Later when I asked Mom, she told me it was slang from the early days of the 1950s. "This is Mr. Conklin," Liz said. "She's my friend and was Mr. Thomas' agent. She asked me to run her up here, because she was concerned someone might take the opportunity to steal souvenirs. Or manuscripts," my mother added. The little tape recorder was safe in her bag, and her phone was in the back pocket of her jeans. One in particular, the last book in the cycle of novels Mr. Thomas was writing. And with this, I'm going to stop it here for this part of Stephen King's Leader. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye bye.